Hello and a very warm welcome here in our very first session at our very first International X-Dream event, our virtual event for our customer base all around the globe. I'm now connected here in our studio in Munich with some remote guests. There is Oliver Meurer from Flowworks, our specialist for media asset management. We do have John from Squared Paper, our specialist for workflow orchestration. We have Ozan Gezer from Libero Systems, all about live ingest. And last but not least, we have Aurélien from Woody Technology, who is our specialist for all the types of ingest. This session is about ingest, challenges, and the latest solutions. A very warm welcome to all of you that have joined us from all around the globe. We will jump right into the topic immediately. The first question that we should bring up is what type of ingests are existing. So we should define what our topic is about, and I will try to do that myself. So when we talk about ingest, we obviously talk most often about ingest at the central ingest desks at broadcasters or post-production facilities, for instance. Or we have kiosk PCs on the aisles of a broadcaster where the journalists and the teams themselves, typically remote, to the central ingest systems, what then concludes to the ingest into the post-production systems. Or we talk about ingest from the desktop PCs of video journalists, or more and more often remote ingest. When we talk about remote ingest, we think about, let's say, the Washington studio of a broadcaster that is ingesting news items from abroad back home, or we are talking about someone who is with the camera at a press conference that ingests right away from the laptop to that central post-production facility. Or think about someone who's really on the street, has done a shooting of, let's say, an accident, and is ingesting via a smartphone and internet connection. But when we talk about ingest, we also think about social media ingest, because more and more often we say, what happens first at YouTube. So there's the need to browse the content on YouTube and to do a professional ingest from there in a high quality and also with all the metadata. What else? Classically, ingest of live sources. Think about all the studio productions, the live feeds that are received via satellite, but more and more often via internet and streaming connections. Yeah, I think we covered quite a lot already. The question now is what functionality is required in such workflows. And here I think we can distinguish on one hand into the file recording, the recording of live sources to files, or the ingest of files that are typically recorded today on a digital camera. Let's start with the camera first. You want to browse the content on the camera storage media device. You want to select videos. You want to preview them. Then from there, you want to probably trim videos, because from a long press conference, you probably don't want to ingest the complete 1 hour of recording. And then finally, you also need some metadata, at least the most important to find the content later on in the post-production systems. And for this, the operators need front-end user interfaces to do all such operations. When you think about recording from live sources, so like live streams or studio productions, live feeds, then it's similar. But obviously, you do not need to select the sources. They are given. But again, you need to have some metadata that is ingested together with the files at the end into the post-production system, like name of the production, an ID, probably the name of the cameraman, the journalist, some creators data, the date, things like that. But on the other hand, when we are talking about recording from live, you probably, beside a crash recording, you want to have a scheduled recording or even multicam recording. So lots of needs that are around, and here we want to now dive a little bit more into the details. And for that reason, I would like to ask John to describe a little bit more in detail what a workflow looks like at a broadcaster or a post-production facility. So what happens when the ingest or the recording of the device or the stream has happened, and how is the content processed from there into the post-production systems? John.
Specifications, so you might need to do a transcode, and that again could be on-premise or in the cloud. And then you're going to probably want to do things like audio measurement and correction, and then you may have some manual steps later on in your ingest.
Yeah, we will look into that a little bit later. So what I try to point out is that ingest nowadays happens at various locations. It can be in the central facility, it can be at the desktop of a journalist, it can be somewhere in a studio, it can be in a remote studio, it can be on the street from a video journalist who's at an event where something's happening. It can be a mobile operation, it can be a remote studio. So there are various places where ingest does origin from. And now we want to look a little bit into the challenges that people might have when they are ingesting from there. Aurélien, what would you say is the typical functionality that is required for a file ingest today?
So here we need to talk about the manual ingest and the automated ingest. But for the manual ingest, what you need is first to preview and browse your content, see what you have, and select what you need to ingest. So previewing the content is quite important. As Oliver mentioned before, you also need to enrich the content, give some information about it, so it will be easier to find then in the various systems it will be used. So enriching the metadata is another feature that you need, and this can be done manually or automatically with AI processes. And sometimes you can expect some more advanced features like trimming the content, stitching clips together, or all these kind of workflow features that depend on your need and how you're used to work with the content then for editing.
Ozan, if we look on the other type of sources, what are live sources like live streams, like signals, studio productions, what would you say are the key functionality, the key features that is required in these areas?
So actually, the HDI is not the only source today. As a new technology is emerged, new type of signal also emerged. In addition to HDI, different signal types such as web streams, NDI, and the WebRTC must be supported in the system. But the most important thing, both in the past and today, is that the recorded file can be used in the production as quick as possible. In this way, user can produce files with the different variations by trimming the recorded files or by using the different NLE editor. In addition, that there should be an effective interface to quickly select both the recording formats and the input types to be used in the ingesting. Since everything happens quickly in the production, we must be able to provide an interface that can strong and the operator hands.
So would you say that the challenges for today are on one hand the new type of sources and on the other hand the usability to handle such type of sources?
Yes. So the challenge is the technology is emerged, and we should keep and follow this technology. So and the new technologies have a different benefits, and we should use this benefit. But on another hand, we also provide the really good interface to make a simple workflow and different kind of things.
And Aurélien, would you say that the same applies to file ingest? And what about newer types of file ingest?
Yeah, yes, the same applies, because one of the main challenges is these numerous kind of sources that you can deal with. And from a user perspective, this doesn't matter. You want to have one user interface, very intuitive, one workflow, always the same, no matter what the source is. So this is one of the main challenges that we are facing, to offer a tool to people who need to manage their ingest that will be able to handle all these formats and all these sources that will standardize everything, because of course the workflow at some point needs the content to be standardized, and all of these technical operation without troubling the users, without making the experience difficult for them. So of course that's the same challenge that we are facing.
Thank you. Now, John, let's come back to the workflow topic that you've mentioned earlier. What happens right after the ingest? So when the file or the stream receives the ingest station, what is the workflow from there towards the media asset management system, the production management system?
So that workflow really depends on what the customer wants and what their requirements are. It may be that they simply just need to ingest the file and store it in a high-res format for later use, or it may be that they need to convert it into their mezzanine file format, and then there may be various other steps after that, like you may need to check the loudness and do any corrections on that, enrich it with some more metadata, and finally you may want to then transcode to multiple formats for your playout system or for onward distribution to VOD platforms, for example. So in terms of a workflow, it really depends. As I said previously, and as we all know, the main parts of the ingesting in terms of recording or getting the file in are fairly similar as in terms of what the goal is, but then really after that, it could be anything that you want to do with it after that.
Oliver, from a media asset management perspective, what would you like to add? What type of action do you see in this kind of, let's say, ingest workflow?
Well, what the guys have already said is entirely true. What Aurélien just said, that you want to norm things, that John has just described, how an ingest can then trigger various actions. That, from our perspective, is an absolutely crucial point. When you ingest a file, there's a reason for ingesting it. So the reason, there can be a lot of different reasons, and hence there can be a lot of different workflows. What is crucial is to understand that you are not just ingesting a file, but you're actually starting a workflow. So what we're looking for is a bit of information that tells us this file has come in and it's been QC'd and it's okay. What should we do with it? So we can automate the next steps. The next steps beyond the technical things described can, of course, be notifying a user that new content has arrived, updating a project, maybe doing additional processing like the transcoding, like the branding, etc. But it can go much further. We can run AI over the file and associate the file. We can even create new projects. We can trigger off review and approval processes. All of that can be done automatically and can be driven by things like metadata or a type of file or a media tag. So in our perspective, as we talk about it now, the sort of soft skills, the soft information that a piece of media coming into a system can bring along and would actually trigger an awful lot of additional activity. And that is actually I believe, very crucial point nowadays to automate more and hence save time and money.
Oliver, that sounds like automation is a key element in ingest. Ozan, what would you say, what kinds of technologies should be used today to save costs on storage, for instance, or also in terms of manpower to be faster in ingest?
So nowadays, the way to save on storage costs is able to make a good management and to follow the ingesting materials in correct workflow. For example, the problem we see in many of our customers is that recorded files contains many freeze frame or black frame for minutes, even hours, due to fact that the recorded are not followed or managed correctly. We generally suggest signal detection and the AI technology in the production ensure that products are automatically started and stopped in conditions such as freeze frame or black frame. In this way, the solution become an operator-independent system and you save on files that take up unnecessary space in the storage.
Thank you. And that also helps then to speed up the ingest workflow, so to make the files available earlier for the production management and the media asset management?
Yes, we can also use a kind of AI or signal features. Then we can automate it with the different workflows and try to be ready the file as soon as possible for the on-air.
Yeah. Aurélien, when thinking about the requirements for today's ecosystems and the changes in technologies, what are the current trends? So Oliver and Aurélien have, and Ozan have mentioned some, but probably you would like to complete the picture.
Yeah, I think one of the most important trends now is that the workflows, the systems, the infrastructure, the people are distributed across different locations. They're not all at the same place. That's not the beginning of this move. That's not the end. We are somewhere in the middle. And that's one of the most challenging part of building new systems today, because you have to deal with having systems and people on different sides, but also wanting to have everything happening in the same system. So you also need to distribute your ingest system and to offer a possibility to centrally monitor what is happening, because people are everywhere, media are everywhere, in the cloud, on premises. This is another trend. But from a business point of view and from a supervision point of view, you need to have an eye on what's happening and a global view of what's happening. So I would say that's one of the most important trends that we are trying to address today.
Yeah, so I think that brings us again back to the question about the ingest workflows. So John, for a customer, what are the main questions that he needs to answer while setting up an ingest workflow? When you cooperate with your customers, so how are you taking them at hand?
So there's quite a few things that we need to ask them. The first one is most likely, is it going to be a manual ingest or is it going to be automated? Or is it going to be a mixture? Is it going to be done in one place, or is it going to be decentralized with people ingesting from home or remotely, etc.? What is the target format or the target formats? We're going to want to know, are we ingesting to one place or many places at once? And what metadata are we going to have available at the point of the ingest? And then what metadata is going to be added later on in the workflow? And finally, are there any technical challenges or any bottlenecks that we're going to expect that we need to build rules around, or make sure we've got workarounds in place for?
So, and obviously once you have asked all that questions, I assume you have an answer then to them as well. So how would you react? What can you propose your customers?
Well, probably the way we normally do it is that there's no single answer, because as we've discussed, that you could be doing all manner of things after that. But usually we would say, look, once you've got the file into the system, you need some kind of workflow which has a few steps, and usually we will work together with the customer in the workflow designing tool and just say, look, we would recommend you have these kinds of steps, like you might have a QC and a virus check and some metadata gathering, but then really get down into the fine details of what their requirements are and tweak it with them, kind of do it as a collaborative approach rather than just proposing something up front and saying that's what you get.
So as we would like to talk about latest solutions in this auditorium session here, would you say that on one hand customization is one key to a solution, and on the other hand to utilize standardized products to build such custom solutions?
So I would say it makes sense to, instead of just taking something completely off the shelf, which you can do, you need something that you can still customize to meet your requirements. But it does make sense for it to have a standard workflow setup built in, which works out of the box, and then you can just tweak things or then you can further customize it. So it makes sense to use a standard product or a toolkit, which you can then customize to your requirements. There's no point starting completely from scratch, because why would you do that these days when there's things out there to help you?
So now we spoke a little bit about all the, let's say, workflow and the workflow automation that happens after the file was created. Aurélien, I would like to come back to the origin of all that file sources, what you are typically looking after with your products. I think an important topic is security, especially when we look into sources that are not known to us, or when the ingest happens probably from the outside. So what about security? And would you say that everyone can start an ingest into my production management system?
Yeah, you're right, Stefan. There are several points where security must be considered and sorted out. So the first thing is who can do an ingest, and to where, because most of the time you do not have only one ingest workflow on your system, and maybe not all the users are allowed to start an ingest to any storage location or to any system that you have in place. So the users management, the groups management is key here to define who is allowed to do that, and who can see what in terms of ingest destinations, available ingest destinations. And with people working from with people working remotely, you also need to address that through different authentication providers. So now we are integrating with cloud authentication providers to ensure that these rights and these permissions are enforced wherever the user is, just because he will use his standard company credentials to access also the Woolly set of tools. So that's one thing important about security, this users management. The other one is, of course, the transport of the file, especially when you are working remotely. You need to secure the transport of the files from A to B. That there are also some technologies allowing that. And at the end, sometimes you are browsing content that is already in your system because you want to ingest it to somewhere else. So you have a NAS storage with a lot of content, and at some point you need to ingest this content to a PAM or to a MAM or to a playout server. Here you also need to ensure that people can access the files because they need it, but that they cannot alter the files, remove files, and this is also this kind of security issues that we are addressing with the Woolly tool.
So I've understood that this kind of, let's say, central authentication database was potentially not within my facility, but somewhere hosted externally and is available with different protocols, is one of these latest solutions that you would recommend to gain security, right?
Yes, and we see more and more customers moving to these kind of providers. So moving from the traditional Active Directory model, which is very suitable for on-prem deployments, to cloud authentication providers mainly based on SAML2 protocol. That is one of the most used. So you have several solutions, OneLogin, Okta, that are allowing you to manage that, and that can also be connected to your Active Directory on-prem. So you can of course mix both solutions.
So earlier, Ozan already has mentioned AI technologies to enhance metadata. And Oliver, I think you mentioned it as well. I would like to come back to that. What do you think are the benefits of AI technology during ingest workflows? So how would the data that is received then in the media asset management system would benefit from that? And on the other hand, what are the constraints?
Well, let's start with the constraints. AI is usually difficult to have local. So you need to transfer files over to another service. and that needs to come back in order to make use of the additional information. But there are lots of ways and means of actually achieving that. Just to give you an example of a more innovative use of AI that goes beyond analyze for things like face recognition, scene detection, a little bit of descriptive metadata. We, for example, have a process where we get a live stream, and let's say it's a press conference being held in English. What we do, we separate off the audio track, chunk it, send those little chunks to an AI system, which is obviously in the cloud, and we receive the chunks back as a transcription and a translation. And those transcriptions and translations we rejoin with the visual live stream with a very short break, i.e. there's a very short delay, and hence we use AI to automatically create other languages, translated subtitles for a live streaming event. So we create a small delay, but we actually do the entire transcription and the translation in one go as we actually live stream. That's a new way of using AI. But beyond that, there are lots of additional ways of making use of the information that AI can generate for you. Popularity, how does this compare to trending stuff on social? How does this new piece of content fit into the items that you may already have in your archive, but there's no obvious metadata link between the two? So it kind of works like a recommendation engine, and that can even be matched to what your internal users have lately been looking for, and we can kind of create a suggest function for specific users who were looking for a certain topic just within the last 24 hours, and there's a new piece coming in, and that may have a great relevance to them, but it wouldn't include the metadata that they'd be looking for. So generating information through AI is one thing, but actually making use of that information also through AI is another big topic, and it's a very exciting topic.
Thank you so much for mentioning the transcription and translations. Just as a side note, we will have an auditorium session, especially on this topic on the third day, on Thursday, with specialists for these topics. Oliver, I would like to come back to the limitations. So often people hope that, especially like transcriptions are perfect, metadata generation is perfect. They hope that old archives can be restored that way, and all the metadata is created that was not existing earlier. Could you explain a little bit where are the limitations? So what is working today? And can you predict a little bit from the experience from the last 2-3 years what we can hope for to come in the next years?
Well, look, there are limitations in those amount of training that a piece of AI has received. So to give you a typical example, we have customers who are industrials, and they will have a lot of their own lingo, their own language. If the AI hasn't been trained to understand that language, obviously it will make mistakes. It will misinterpret what it's hearing or reading, and come up with something from its own knowledge base, which does not fit to what the industrial customer would use as his own language. That's a typical example of a mistake. The percentage of those mistakes or misinterpretations happening is decreasing overall and will continue to decrease. It is getting better, and it is getting to a point where I would say it's very usable information. The ways around it is quite simple. Train the AI. That costs money and is an effort, be sure. Two is you have your own staff. So make use of the AI, because we're talking about ingest. As part of your ingest process, run the AI, but then don't just accept the file and that's it, it's finished. Actually run it through an editorial review process. So your own staff has a chance to check what the AI has come up with and actually correct it and improve it, augment it. So there's the important point again of running a proper workflow, which in this case would be purely editorial review.
So, John, on the other hand, so we just spoke about all this automation. What about human errors? I think they also need to take in account when a video is cataloged. What are the problems and how can those problems be overcome?
Yes, so human errors certainly do account for a lot of mistakes that we see. As you say, most of them. So, I mean, most of the human errors are going to be things like entering incorrect metadata or marking things up against the wrong time zone, or, you know, starting the record too early or too late. But there's things we can do to, I mean, you can never get rid of all human errors, but you obviously can do a few things. For example, where the user is going to be entering metadata, you can make sure you tightly lock down what's valid and what's invalid. So, like, for example, if you've got a form, you can make sure that you can only enter the right types of values in the right type of boxes. You can then have automatic validation checks. So when the user tries to submit their to say, yeah, I've done that, it will, you know, check before it sends it into the system. Then you can have manual double checking by a supervisor, even if it's just a spot check. They do a spot check, you know, once every X number of files. And then also there may be some other databases which you have in your ecosystem, like you might have a MAM system or some other system where there's a record of that content that you might be able to call upon to validate the entries that have been entered by your user.
Thank you so much, John, for that. Ozan, I would like to come back to the ingest from live sources. This is a technical task, but also an editorial task. How do you deal with that topic from a usability point of view for the equipment that you supply to the studio productions?
Although there are complex structure and the workflow in the background, we should always offer to user an intuitive and simple UI. One of the most important issues that can prevent errors in the broadcast is that the interface used provides the best possible performance. Of course, we must always make sure that the solution provides the best feature, but while providing this best feature, we have to be careful because providing all this can create a complex UI at the end of the day. Therefore, it always to be important not to get confused while doing everything best. So from the perspective of the technical team, everything we provide should be easy to manage in the background and can be performed quickly. Since the technical team will always want to keep hold of the entire system, while it should be a well-prepared backend in terms of both service and management. In this way, no matter how complex the workflow and the system it is, you will always benefit to get best performance from the users and the technical team. End of the day, the time between ingest and the material being on air is reduced, and the media is ready for on air as quick as possible.
So would you say that simplicity is one of the most important answers to complex problems?
Yes, exactly.
So thanks so much for that. Aurélien, also in preparation to the next upcoming session, how would you say that remote work is implying on the ingest workflows?
It's impacting ingest workflows a lot, actually. Remote work means that you need to have access to your ingest tools, either because it can be easily installed on your device or because has been deployed in the cloud and you can easily access it. So we offer both possibilities. The second challenge is, of course, to transport the media and the metadata from where you are to where you want it to be. So that's also something that can be solved with various technologies, and especially transfer acceleration technologies. And probably the last impact is how do you notify, how do you let people know what you are doing if you are working alone at home. So you also need all these communication tools, notification tools, to make people aware of what you have ingested. That's, I think, the main impact.
Thanks, Aurélien. And if you are interested in this topic to get more and deeper information, then please stay tuned. We will be back with that topic here in the auditorium in just some minutes. John, one last question to you. What are the challenges that we need to expect in the future?
I think, well, there's a few challenges, including not to mention the fact that as video quality and resolution gets higher, we're just going to have larger and larger files we need to process, and more different resolutions we need to process and generate for mobile devices, TVs, set-top boxes, over the top, and things like color space conversion. But probably the biggest change is likely to be the fact that it's going to be better to generate the needed metadata at the ingest point rather than at the distribution point, because media companies serve many more outlets, for example, on demand and live streaming. The costs are just going to go up and up in terms of if we need to enter metadata for each of the delivery points before we deliver it. It makes sense to move the metadata generation and markup upstream of the library so that it's easier for onward distribution later on. So basically, I think those are going to be the main challenges we're going to face.
So would you say that more and more things need to be done right at the very, very beginning of a media production workflow rather than trying to get them right downstream?
I think yes, it's better to have things right at the start. Obviously, that's never going to be perfect all the time, and you'll be able to put things in workflows for users to handle where not all of that information can be captured downstream. But whatever can be captured right at the start, it makes sense to do it then, and use various tools to get that metadata in, whether it's talking to APIs and gathering information, or using some AI, rather than relying on a user entering it manually later on. It's better to have your content all prepared in advance if possible.
Let me quickly ask you in just a few words, what are the consequences if I don't do it that way?
Well, I mean, simply, you're just going to cause yourself a headache, I guess. You're just going to have more manual intervention, or you're going to have to, we sometimes see customers where there's lots of files on a file store or in various different MAMs or PAM systems, and there's not the associated metadata available. And it doesn't mean you're stuck forever. You can still go and do a sensible cleanup process, take all your files out of your archive, process them through, try and gather extra bits of metadata and flag up errors to the user. So you can still go back and tidy up any messes which have been made in the past. It's still possible.
Thanks, John, for that. We are running short in time, but Oliver, just one last question to you also to have a little bit an outlook onto the next days, day 2 and 3. You are an advocate for all the topics that have to be considered when thinking about how to make use of the material that was ingested. So what else should we consider and think about?
Well, look, the key thing is you actually have to ask yourself, why am I ingesting this piece? It depends on what you're going to do with it. Is your job to post-produce it? Do you have to just approve it? Are you an archive? Are you somebody who's now going to go and monetize the item, i.e., repurpose it, maybe just retranscode it and deliver it out to 27 VOD platforms? So if you know why you are doing something, you can basically set your ingest systems, plural, set them up with multiple workflows which follow on. And the better you do that, the more you've thought about why you are actually ingesting something, all the factors that have been addressed, the metadata is better. You've got clever use of AI. You have more automation in your workflows, etc. All of that will improve your overall system performance because it will simply be a more complete system. So my recommendation to people who are talking about ingest is actually ask yourself, why are you ingesting? How are you going to make money on this? because that will tell you how to best ingest and what needs to be part of the ingest.
Oliver, thank you so much for this, being the advocate for the usage of the material. Thank you so much for all of you being with us. Thanks to our guests here in the auditorium. You can catch up with them right away in our coffee bar. So you just move back to the main page, and from there you can join our so-called coffee bar, or alternatively you can approach them to ask for private conversations. So if you are interested in talking to Ozan, for instance, about all the ingest from file sources, from live sources, studio sources, streams, feeds, then please make contact with the Libero team. And with Ozan, if you are interested in file ingest, or remote ingest from various mobile devices, then please approach Aurélien. He will be with us here in the next session. If you are interested in workflow automation, workflow streamlining, manual workflows, automated workflows, then please make your way to the Squared Paper demo pod and approach John and Spencer. And if you are interested in media asset management, production management, and all this type of publishing, then please make contact with Oliver. Thank you so much for being with us here. It's 11 o'clock. I'm closing the session for now. And in just some minutes, my colleague Tobias will be back with you here in the auditorium when he talks with Aurélien about remote ingest.